Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's website chat with Jenny Stafford, State Librarian. So Jenny, take it away and give me the nod when you would like to move forward with the slides.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our April website chat. I hope it's starting to feel like spring, but we shall see. Why don't you go ahead and advance, Colette? We've got a bit of a busy agenda today. I want to take a moment to welcome some of our new staff, including our own Colette, who certainly doesn't feel new to the library community, but new to us here at the State Library. We're going to share an update from the State Library Commission meeting this week. They had a rather lengthy commission, so there's a lot for us to talk about there. I want to walk us through a timeline of the implementation of our new public library standards, and then we'll have a time for just some information updates. A couple of other things that I might make mention of that I know are on people's minds since we organized the agenda for this meeting. If we have any questions or time for discussion, we might want to talk a little bit about some of the questions that are arising around the Montana Municipal Insurance Association's decisions with regard to library insurance. And then I just sent a notice this morning, official notice about a change to one of the public library statistics that public libraries are required to collect. So please take a look at your email for that information. The public library statistics is going to change how they're collecting information about virtual programming attendance, and details of that change are in your email, and we'll be sending out additional communications as we get closer to the statistics period. We are required by Montana's administrative rules to notify you 60 days in advance of when you're required to start collecting new cumulative statistics. And so this is our official notice in keeping with that administrative rule that beginning on July 1, there'll be a change in how you're required to collect attendance for virtual programming. Rebecca Camp, our data coordinator, couldn't be with us today, but she'll certainly be available to answer questions that you have. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. Super excited to welcome some new staff to the State Library. I think that many of these people are already known to you. Certainly, Colette has been a longtime partner with the State Library, serving on some of our committees and task force all the way back to the 90s, and joined our staff as the continuing education coordinator in March. And then we've had some turnover within our Montana Shared Catalog System administrators. Rebecca Camp took our data coordinator position, and then Erin Keenan took a position in Bozeman. And so that means we get the opportunity to welcome two new Shared Catalog System administrators, Melanie Carroll, who comes to us from the North Valley Public Library in Stevensville, and Laura Treader, who comes to us from the Montana Historical Society. Again, two longtime friends of the State Library, and it just really tickles me to know that the State Library is able to hire staff that are such good friends and partners, and it makes our job a lot easier, and we hope their transition to working with us a lot easier too. So really pleased to welcome Colette and Melanie and Laura to the State Library team. So let's talk about some State Library Commission updates. And I'm going to ask Colette to add a link into the chat to the commission meeting agenda, which has links to all of the information about the various topics that I want to cover with you today, because there are quite a number of them that have implications or things that I think would be important for you to be aware of. One of the things that the commission took action on that I'm really excited about is to approve a request from the State Library Trust for a donation to the Montana Historical Society Heritage Center to create a sensory trail. The impetus for this idea comes from our work with the patrons of our talking book services who can't read traditional print materials because of blind or low vision disabilities or other kinds of disorders. And as we've been thinking about how we can better serve that population, and as we think about the idea that libraries are about more than just books, we wanted to think about some unique ways to serve that population, and are familiar with the concept of sensory gardens or sensory trails that allow people with different kinds of sensory abilities to interact with those kinds of environments. And so we looked for an opportunity to kind of pilot this idea to see what it might look like. And fortunately, at the same time, the Historical Society is building the new Heritage Center, and they're planning for sort of a trail concept in their landscaping. The idea behind the trail is that you're crossing across the state of Montana from east to west or west to east. And so we proposed the idea to them that with funding from our trust, they might think about what kinds of sensory elements that they could include, including signage that has appropriate Braille or other kinds of tactile communication information, plants that are native that have certain smells, the sound of moving water, the feel of moving water, other kinds of elements within the trail that add to a sensory experience. So the State Library Commission approved that donation to the Heritage Center, and we're really grateful to have the opportunity to partner with the Historical Society in this way, and to think again, as I said, about how we as a library can provide different kinds of opportunities to serve this population. Related to our talking book program, the Commission also approved a proposal to restructure that program. If you're not familiar with our talking book program, it's a program that falls under the umbrella of the National Library Service, which is a program of the Library of Congress. And there's special federal legislation that makes access to recorded materials, even those that are under copyright, available to people who can't read traditional print material. Historically, that's been people who have blind or low vision. They are relaxing that definition to include non-organic causes of reasons why people can't read traditional print materials, including learning disorders like dyslexia and so forth. So there's a large population in Montana that the Talking Book Services could serve. We currently have about 2,000 patrons that receive recorded audiobooks from the state library. We circulate them, those materials to these patrons on cartridges, and we supply special machines that play these recordings. And then we also provide readers advisor services to these patrons. We think in Montana there's somewhere between 20 and 50,000 people that meet the eligibility requirements for the Talking Book program. And we wanted to have an opportunity to further outreach to that population, to grow the number of patrons that we're serving and be able to make a positive impact for them. So with some restructuring, we're planning to outsource the circulation and readers advisor services that we currently offer to the Utah State Library, and then take the cost savings from that change to invest into an outreach program to further support engaging with that population. The Utah State Library has been operating a talking book program for more than 50 years, and they already contract with Alaska and Wyoming for similar services. And we've actually contracted with them for many years to provide Braille resources for our patrons. So we'll be expanding that contract to include these other kinds of services. we'll need to create an outreach and engagement plan to identify key stakeholders that we want to work with to engage this population more. And of course, libraries are one of those key stakeholders. I know some of you may be familiar with the program. Maybe you've even received training on eligibility requirements and use of some of the technology, but we know we need to do more engagement with libraries so that people in your communities can take advantage of these services as well. So look for more information about those changes and an opportunity to work with us in the future. The commission adopted an FY23 starting budget for this next fiscal year. With regard to revenue for the state library, our federal Library Services and Technology Act award from the Institute of Museum and Library Services remained flat this year. So there was no increase in funding there. And we're in the second year of our state biennium. So our funding for library development services is the same as it was this current fiscal year, which means that our FY23 budget is largely the same as the budget that we have in place this year. So we're not anticipating any changes to services or any new services. The amount of funding awarded to federations through the Federation Grant Program remains $225,000. There'll be continuing programs and continuing training opportunities throughout the year. And then in addition to the FY23 budget, we have our remaining ARPA dollars that we continue to spend on the hotspot lending program. Our efforts to improve the internal wiring and cabling in libraries is underway. CARA continues to work to enter into agreements to offer new models of e-resources through libraries for your patrons. And then we're continuing our efforts to support increased digital content about Montana through the Montana Memory Project. So a lot of great work continuing into this next fiscal year, not a lot of new efforts underway. Few more items from the commission that I wanted to bring to your attention. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the implementation of the new public library standards. But the commission took action to grant automatic waivers for any standards that exist in the current standards that libraries will be certifying here in the next couple of months that don't extend into the newly adopted standards that will go into effect on July 1. So we'll talk about that in more detail in just a little while. We are entering the time when we're starting to plan for the upcoming 2023 legislative session. And so the commission took a couple of different actions in support of that process. We've talked now for several months about the idea of changing the legislation that governs state aid to public libraries to allow for the inclusion of tribal college libraries. And so the commission took action to direct the state library to propose a change in legislation through the governor's legislative planning process. They did stipulate that any proposed legislation would be contingent on an increase to the amount of state aid that is awarded to libraries. Again, the state aid statutory appropriation sunsets next year. And so we will be working with the Montana Library Association to see that appropriation reauthorized. And so the commission's intent is that legislation to add tribal college libraries be contingent on an increase to that 40-cent per capita appropriation before tribal college libraries would receive state aid. And that's to ensure that no library is negatively impacted by a distribution of funds because new libraries would be sharing that amount. Does that make sense? Any questions about that change? And then the State Library Commission directed the state library to move forward with a number of different kinds of budgetary requests. Some of them are sort of housekeeping requests, but the State Library Commission did authorize the state library to support the Montana Library Association's request for an increase to state aid. And there's a document in the commission meeting materials that describes what would be included in that increase and some cost analysis. So I wanted to bring that information to your attention. First, MLA would be asking for an increase to that per capita state aid from 40 cents per capita to 50 cents per capita. And then they would be asking for funding for base library services that are necessary to support library services throughout the state. The intent behind state aid is to make sure that all libraries are able to offer equal library services to patrons in your communities. And we know, in addition to the per capita funding, that sort of base service relies on your ability to provide access to an online catalog, interlibrary loan, a courier program, access to e-resources. More and more libraries are reliant on the hotspot program and so forth. So what MLA intends to ask for is funding that would support local libraries' budgets to be able to take advantage of the Montana Shared Catalog, a truly statewide courier program that serves libraries statewide, our OCLC group services contract, the hotspot program, overdrive to support Montana Library to Go, and then e-resources content to truly serve learning across a lifetime, to include e-resources to support public libraries, school libraries, and academic libraries. So we're targeting about a $5.4 million ask of the legislature. And again, as you have time, I encourage you to review the information that's provided on the State Library website. We will be working with MLA to support a very concerted outreach effort ahead of the legislative session to help try to ensure the success of these kinds of legislative proposals. So look for more information from MLA about how you can get involved in those efforts as well. And then the other legislative request I wanted to make you aware of is, it's pretty pie in the sky. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but we talked about the fact that there is a need for funding for library infrastructure. And so the state library is proposing a $20 million ask for some kind of either grant or low-income loan program that could potentially fill that need. The commission did not take immediate action on that particular proposal, but instead requested that they have an opportunity to meet with our legislative budget chair ahead of taking action on that proposal. The thinking behind this proposal is that, as many of you know, there really is no public source of funds at either the state or federal level to support building needs in libraries, whether they're emergency building needs to improve accessibility, funding to address remodels or additions or new buildings. Many states have these kinds of state programs. And so we would look at modeling our program based on what we see in other states. There is already a program in Montana to support school infrastructure. So that's another program that we could potentially model and ask after. Again, this is a pretty pie in the sky idea, but we know this need exists in Montana. So the commission did express support for exploring this idea, and again, want to get more feedback from our budget chair before suggesting this legislation through the legislative process. And then the other big topic of discussion at the State Library Commission meeting was with the board of the Imagine If Library and the issues surrounding their ability to meet the public library standards and then the awarding of state aid. I think you're all aware now that the Imagine If Library Board hired a new director. She started last month. Her name is Ashley Cummins, and we've had a chance to meet her, and she's of course getting to know her staff. Everybody speaks very highly of her, and I was certainly impressed with her. But the fact of the matter is that she does not hold a Master's of Library Science, and that is a requirement in the public library standards for a library that serves a population of their size. And when the library board was making the decision about what library director to hire, we made it known that if they selected this candidate, that they would jeopardize their state aid funding. So they requested an opportunity to meet with the State Library Commission to learn more about the issue and to share their concerns with the State Library Commission. And so that opportunity took place at the meeting this past Wednesday. 3 members of the library board were present, and Director Cummins was present, along with 1 member of the Flathead County Commission. This library, when we deny them state aid, will have the opportunity to appeal that decision, and the appeals process is spelled out in administrative rules. So there's a formal process that we would need to follow. The Imagine If Library Board has declined at this point to go through that appeal process. So there was no request at this meeting for the commission to consider an appeal. The members of the library board spoke more in favor of a change to the administrative rule that would either lessen the requirements for a library director or allow for more of a team approach, where if other members of the staff have master's degrees, that would qualify to meet the standards. So again, the nature of the conversation was more around a change to the standards than an appeal to the decision that I will make in these circumstances. Several members of the public spoke in support of the state library and against any recommendations that the state library grant an appeal to the Imagine If libraries or to change the standards. Commissioner Arlich spoke very strongly about the fact that the master's degree is the professional standard for our profession, and that it's important for any profession to look to their professional standards, and spoke very strongly against any intent to lower the standards at some point in the future. So again, because the Imagine If Library Board wasn't really asking the commission to do anything, the commission didn't take any action in this matter, but did listen to and respond to questions from the guests. And at this point, that's where the matter sits. And the library board does have an opportunity to appeal the decision in May after we go through the formal public library standards certification process. But at this point, there's no action from the commission. All right, that was a lot. Like I said, it was a bit of a marathon commission meeting, so a lot of activity going on.
So I've shared a few links and encourage everyone to add their comments or questions to the chat. But at this moment, we want to practice some self-care and just give you a chance or encourage you to look away from your screen for a moment, maybe stretch your fingers or, move your bodies if you need to. That was a lot of information to process so far, and we have a little bit further to go. So just take a second, stretch, look away from that screen, and then think about any questions you have, and we'll just plow on ahead here in about 30 seconds. That was a tip that I got from one of the recent PCI webinars. And so just want to practice what we preach, and hopefully some of you have had a chance to watch some of those really helpful and informative webinars from PCI. So I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide and then take it away again, Jenny.
Thanks, Colleen. So let's go ahead and talk about where we are with the public library standards process and implementation of the new standards. So if you could go ahead and advance the slide. I mentioned that the State Library Commission took action to approve automatic waivers for about 8 of the standards that are in effect right now that will not be in effect beginning July 1. Those of you who have gone through the certification process know, excuse me, that if your library is unable to meet a standard, you have the opportunity to request a waiver. And in that process, you let the state library know why you can't meet the standard and what your plan to meet that standard is within a period of 3 years. And because these standards won't be in effect in July, it doesn't make sense to ask you to request deferrals if you don't meet these standards and to submit plans to meet them, since you won't be required to meet them in just a few short months. And so we asked the commission to grant automatic waivers for those standards, so that you wouldn't have to go through that process if necessary. Those standards are linked from the State Library Commission meeting materials, but just so you know, those standards include the need for the board to review and update its bylaws every 3 years, easy to access written policies, procedures, and bylaws. Some of these standards exist just in slightly different forms. That the board and director review the adequacy of your insurance coverage every 3 years. That annually the board evaluates the performance of the director. That's one I know that we typically grant a lot of deferrals on, because especially local governments don't encourage those kinds of annual reviews. That the board must adopt and review a personnel policy every 3 years. That the library maintains written up-to-date job descriptions, and the requirement that every 2 years the library gathers feedback on library services through a survey. So if you're not currently meeting those standards, you will not be required to submit a plan to the state library on how you will meet those standards going forward. We are going to open up the certification process for this year in early May. So look for information from us on how you go about doing that. And again, libraries are required to submit the forms indicating that they either meet all of those standards or request waivers by July 25th. On July 1, the new standards go into effect. So when you start that certification process in May, it will be for the existing standards. And the new standards that the State Library Commission adopted last August will then take effect this coming July. This late summer and fall, when I'm looking at any waivers for ongoing standards, those will be considered and issued as appropriate. And then state aid checks will be issued in October. And then next year, libraries at this time will begin the process of certifying that you meet the new standards that go into effect in July. Are there any questions about that process or timeline?
If you'd like to unmute and ask a question, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, it looks like there aren't any questions in the chat at this time.
Thanks, Pauline. All right.
Sorry, I don't know if my question was showing up.
Is that Rachel?
Yeah, it is. Sorry.
Hey, Rachel.
I typed a question in the chat, but I don't know if it showed up. That's weird. But my question was just about the new standard for certifying trustees.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering if it would be possible to get a recommendation list or something of brief videos that we could show our trustees at the beginning of board meetings.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. We'll be working on that kind of content to provide to you. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Did my question show up in the chat? Because I'm
It did. It
oh,
did.
never mind then. Sorry.
No worries. I'm glad that you spoke up.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, should we move on? We wanted to share with you helpful ways that you can find information from us and connect and learn with us from us, including our website. I'm going to talk a second about our newsletters, our help desk. We always post information to the Wired listserv. You can always look for our activities on our Aspen events calendar. And of course, we are happy to answer your emails and calls. Feel free to contact us at any time. I hope you're becoming familiar with our Gov Delivery Channels as a way to get more focused content from the State Library about our various programs and services that we offer. So you can subscribe to any or all of those Gov Delivery Channels that we make available. And then our staff have started compiling a helpful newsletter that is sort of a compilation of the content that's coming through Gov Delivery in one really helpful newsletter every other week or so. So look for that information coming from us as well. I think we have a little bit of time left, and I know there's been a lot of email and discussion about the Montana Municipal Insurance Association and some of the changes that we're making. So I would be happy to just engage in a discussion with any of you and do our best to answer questions. Knowing that there's a lot of information that we don't know at this point in time. These are some legal questions that our legal services are researching, but we're doing our best to make sure that we hear your questions and can respond to them or ask legal services the appropriate questions to get you the information that you need. Again, what we're hearing from MMIA is that they will continue to ensure libraries, if those libraries have negotiated agreements between library boards and the city that acknowledge the city's personnel policies and that involve the city governance in personnel discussions. My verbal discussions that I've had with the director of MMIA are such that they're not expecting library boards to cede any decision-making authority to the city. If, for example, there are questions surrounding a grievance, MMIA has said their intent is that the library board seek input from the city, but that authority to make final decisions remains with the library board. So that's what I'm being told verbally, but we want to be very, very careful that what is actually put into agreements upholds that authority and doesn't have any unintended consequences that we might not be thinking about. So I've gotten some guidelines from MMIA that they've asked that we share with our attorneys. So I will do that. And I know several people are sending me examples of language from your libraries. My intent is to share those examples with our attorney, not to have our attorney review each of the agreements individually, but to look at them as a way of offering sort of overall guidance on the kinds of language you should include, what you should not include, and any kinds of red flags or things to watch for to make sure that nothing that's put in writing might cede your board's authority when it comes to personnel matters. I know that many libraries are starting to talk about other options for insurance. So if you're interested in information about what options might exist, contact our consultants and they can let you know what other libraries have or what they're talking about. MMIA is asking for libraries to make decisions by May 16th about whether or not they want to continue to have insurance through MMIA or whether they intend to look for other options. And then MMIA has said that libraries will have up to another year to negotiate an agreement between the board and the city. So there is some time there. I know that this is an issue that is creating a lot of anxiety. Nobody wants to lose insurance and all that might come with that kind of decision. But it's also something that takes a lot of thought and careful deliberation. And like I said, some good legal guidance. So I really encourage you to take your time and not to rush into any decisions. Certainly involve your board, any kind of legal counsel in the state library as you're going forward with your decision making. We hope to be able to talk in more detail about this issue at the April 28th library directors meeting. And hopefully by then we'll have some better legal guidance for all of you from our legal services. So that's what I know right now.
Jenny, this is Nancy from Wadsworth. Could I get some clarification? I guess I'm a little confused as to what exactly this entails. So essentially, the MMIA insurance is for, say, libraries that hire their own employees, and then those employees are covered by insurance?
MMIA is an insurance option for cities. So cities are members of MMIA. And so libraries that are city libraries and get their insurance through the city through MMIA would be impacted by this decision.
So is it just employees? And the reason I'm asking is the insurance for the physical aspects of the library comes through the town. So is this affected also?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. I know it involves health insurance in particular. Maybe work comp. I don't know about facilities. I don't know if anybody else joining us knows the answer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just need to stop talking. But when we went through this a few years ago, it was just the workers' comp and employees' health insurance. I don't know if this is any different than what we had to deal with, but if it seems like it's basically the same, and the actual building on the insurance was covered by a different company and wasn't an issue.
Other questions? I saw Kathy's chat saying that their town is covering their building. Thanks, Kathy. Starla says we actually made our own personnel policy last year and stopped using the town's. We felt that having our employees sign the town's policy put the final say with the mayor instead of the board, and we added that to our interlocal agreement. Starla, do you get your insurance through MMIA?
I believe the building is covered under MMIA, but we pay liability and Montana State Fund on the employees. So
I see. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. That was a lot of good information. I always appreciate the opportunity to connect with all of you and to give you a little insight into what's going on here at the State Library. Again, happy to welcome our new staff. I hope you appreciate knowing about the work of the State Library Commission. We've got some changes coming up with our public library standards. And as always, we hope you always look for ways to connect with us and to stay engaged. And how about a round of applause for Coley Bartow's very first website chat? Woo!
This is really awesome and fun. Just I wanted to let everyone know that we'll have a recording for this session posted soon. So those who are watching the recording can claim their continuing education credit. As always, we love to have your feedback on the continuing education, including a session like this. So the link for that evaluation is in the chat as well. Thank you so much for everybody's attendance, and we just appreciate getting a chance to hear your voices and see your faces, and really look forward to seeing more of you in person as the coming months bring us together again. Be in touch, and we just appreciate your time.
Bye everyone, have a great weekend.